So last weekend I went to Catton Park with Tom, which is a kind of like a stately home just south of Derby, which is near Burton-on-Trent, and it's a great day out because it's somewhere where if you're a hunter and you're not a club member, you get an opportunity to do some target shooting basically at steel at quite decently long ranges. So yeah, we had a great day, and what follows is what happened. So we started out at about 300 yards, and that's a Munkjack steel to the right of the tree. Now, I'm using my Tikka T3x in 243, as I'm sure most of you are fairly familiar with by now. I've got 100 grain loads. Predictably, I'm using PPU, not Seiko ammo, because obviously, you know, we're going to burn through a lot of it, so I want to keep it reasonably affordable. And my scope is a Schmidt & Bender 6x fixed zoom, and it's zeroed at about 200 yards, well 50 yards, but that's also 200 yards with a 100 grain load. So as you can imagine, when you reach out to 300, you do need to give a little bit of holdover, but really very, very little. I mean, I'm aiming just over the top of its back to hit it, and obviously there is a bit of an impact on the wind, but yeah, I'm hitting it fairly consistently. So yeah, it was pretty good, to be honest. It was a beautiful day. As you can see, it was very hot. I was burnt to a crisp, to be honest, after a very short period of time. And there were some other targets as well at about 100 yards or so. No, probably 200 yards actually at the end of the field. So it was a pretty good start anyway. Now here's Tom. He's with his CZ. Again, same target. And you may have noticed that it's got a massive bin on the end of it. It doesn't seem to make it any quieter though. Not any quieter than my rifle anyway. But he was hitting pretty well, to be honest. It doesn't take a lot, to be honest, to get somebody shooting quite well with a rifle. It's not like with a shotgun where it's a bit like trying to teach somebody sort of how to dance. Tom wasn't, overly confident on his marksmanship skills, but really, just like little things like just, using the sort of first tab of your finger on the trigger, so obviously the normal stuff, breathing and trigger control, follow through, using your left hand to support the stock into your shoulder and all that sort of thing. And really, within a short period, it's made a big difference. He's got a zero at 50 yards, which is 200 with his 100 grain loads, although he'd got a bit of a variety, I think. So yeah, he'd have been given a similar amount of holdover that my rifle did. The interesting thing was, though, with this cheap PPU ammo, is with my rifle, you always get, well, not always, but occasionally you'll get the odd round that's really difficult to headspace. It just won't chamber. And you end up almost like trying to smack the bolt down to get it to lock down. And I had one round that literally I just could not get it to chamber it at all. Which is one of the things you get with the inconsistency with the ammo with PPU. But I gave it to Tom and I said, I'll just try it on your rifle. Because bearing in mind, his rifle is, it's pretty old. It's like, got at least 20 years old. And it just chambered perfectly first time. And what that tells you is he's got a bit of wear there. I'm sure some of you guys would have lots of tips on that, because there is, I think, headspace gauges you can get. And that is supposedly a thing to check when you're buying a rifle. But, whatever. It's still shooting okay. So here we've got a fox, and this is about 350 yards away. So not actually that much further, but it was a bit more tricky. Although I was hitting it fairly consistently. I don't know if there was just a bit of wind there. But at 350 yards, it was a bit, it was quite a bit more tricky. It's surprising how much an extra 50 yards can make, to be honest. With this shooting. In fact, that might have been me there, look, with about the round I was just talking about, where I just could not get it to go in. Yeah, that was the one. Eventually, as I said, I gave that to Tom to try, and it just chambered first time. But yeah, as I said, you do get that with PPU. It's quite a common thing. The things with ammo is it's not really about, the power or anything like that. It's just about the consistency, and that sort of comes with how much money they're willing to spend on the manufacturing, I guess. You know, the same goes with 2.2 ammo. In fact, with 2.2 ammo, see, yeah, there's me trying again. Look, see, will not chamber. But yeah, you know, you get what you pay for, because I mean that stuff is like £16 for a box of 20 for 100 grains. And when I used to, there you go, that's me giving it to him. With Seiko, it's like what, £28 for a box of 20. So yeah, like I said, you get what you pay for. Power-wise, it's still pretty good, and it's still pretty accurate, to be honest. I wouldn't feel that I was, you know, that it was a particular problem to go and shoot deer with or whatever. But at any given range, you know, you're talking a group where, you know, you might be getting 1.5 MOA with PPU, and you would get half MOA with Seiko. But you know, if you're shooting a target that's like sort of 10 inches or so, which is like the midriff of a deer, that doesn't really, you know, it doesn't make a huge difference. And as you can see here, you know, at 350 yards, I was shooting that fox pretty consistently. As was Tom. I think he was having a little bit of trouble at first, but he was getting there in the end. You can see the top of my back to his right. I'm actually calling that, and I've got his spotting scope that he got from work, just sort of giving him an idea of where he's hitting and how much to pull up and so on and so forth. You know, we could have sat there fiddling with our turrets to adjust for the range, but obviously, real world, you know, you're not normally going to want to shoot more than 200 yards. And if you've got a 0 at 50, which is also 200, you're shooting maybe 3/4 of an inch high at 100, something like that. Overall, that's pretty flat from nothing to 200 yards. It's actually more of a problem at closer range, you know, if you're going at 25 yards and stuff like that, because at 25 yards, it'll shoot really low with my rifle, and that can be quite hard to, you know, maybe a couple of inches, so that can be quite hard to account for. So yeah, we weren't going to sort of fiddle around with our scopes for this, but it was quite good fun, really, because, you know, you've got someone spotting and just saying, yeah, up a bit, down a bit. But the adjustments are so minute at that sort of range, because, you know, just a tiny bit of adjustment down range makes a big difference. That said, we've got this spotting scope that Tom had got from Thomas Jacks, because that's where he's working now. And I have to say, it wasn't that great. In fact, using the camera, I mean, obviously you're looking at the camera in the top right, that seemed to be a lot better. And that's like a cheap £130 Sony Handycam, but it does have 30 times optical zoom. So yeah, it was doing pretty well. The only tricky bit with that was the sort of heat waves were getting in the way a bit. But yeah, it was pretty reliable. And as you can see here, Tom's shooting pretty close. He is getting it a bit below and a bit above. That's sort of what the adjustments are like, because he shoots over the top of its back, and I'll be like, okay, down a bit, and then he'll shoot in front of it. So yeah, if you're limited on the amount of zoom you've got, it can be a little bit tricky. With my rifle, I do want to get some sort of long range scope at some point. A little bit later on, which you'll see, we were shooting an Accuracy International rifle with a massive scope on it. And at that range, it was effortless. I mean, really, that rifle would have been good out to 1,000 yards, no problem. But like I said, when you've got a limited amount of zoom, yeah, it's a bit more tricky. There again, you know, it's good when you're shooting, say, foxes or deer at, you know, sensible ranges. Too much zoom can be a hindrance too. You know, you want to be able to get onto target quickly. So it's always a balance with these things. So here we are with something a little bit special. This is a Lee Enfield Dalile carbine. And you can see with some interesting polymer tipped or jacketed 45 ACP rounds. Now, as many of you, I'm sure you know, this rifle was designed originally for commandos, and I think in World War II. And originally, this is obviously a remake of the rifle, but originally it would have a 1911 magazine in the bottom, and the 1911 magazine would actually go through a hole in the original Lee Enfield magazine, which would leave a gap. And the bolt was deliberately longer, the bolt throw, than it needed to be. And what would happen is when you went to extract the round, instead of the extractor extracting it out, it would extract it downwards into the sort of gap behind the pistol magazine. And that gap in the old Enfield magazine would be lined with velvet. So you would actually collect all of your own brass, and it wouldn't make a noise hitting the ground. And there would also be a bit of velvet on the side of the wood, so when the bolt came down, it was nice and sort of didn't make a sound. So the idea was, you know, you would come up on the beaches of Normandy, I suppose, and there'd be a sentry post, and you would shoot the sentry without causing anybody knowing you were there. Obviously, the original, it had the silencer end of it was much fatter than it is on this rifle. On this rifle, the silencer is it's about the same diameter as the Action, which is a bit more practical if you're going to put a scope on it. But you know, it's effectively much the same thing, and it really was like just shooting an air rifle. It made like no sound at all. So, you know, you've got subsonic rounds, so it really made no noise whatsoever. Now this is a Accuracy International, and it's actually originally a 338 Lampour, but the guy who owned it has put in a 308 barrel and a 308 bolt. He said that's why it was a bit sticky, because you'll notice when we're working the Action, it was a bit stiff and sticky. But my God, that thing is an absolute beast. I must admit, mostly because it's just so heavy. You know, and it's got a great scope on it. You see there, Tom's having a bit of trouble chambering it. You've really got to manhandle that gun to get it to feed. And yeah, it was incredible. The one thing I would say is, though, I really wouldn't want to have to take that into war, because God, it must weigh 15 pounds, something like that. And whilst, yeah, lying prone, it is absolute rock solid, and you can pretty much lie there looking down the scope, and you know, with that turret on the top, you can just click it, moving the crosshair up and down, and watch it move on to target. And yeah, it was pretty incredible. It was effortless. 300 yards really wasn't doing it justice. It would have been interesting to reach out to maybe, you know, 500 yards plus, really, to be honest. It would have been even more interesting to have a go with a 338 Lampour barrel on it. But of course, that's a lot more expensive if you can have a bit of a plink. But yeah, I would have loved to have tried that out. The guy who owned it, incidentally, was an ex-serviceman, I believe. So he's sort of been in Afghanistan and so on. So yeah, it was good for him. It's interesting, actually, because a lot of ex-soldiers can have problems getting their FAC, because the police are worried about any trauma you've gone through, and you know, all the stuff that happens in war might not mean you're a suitable person to be a gun owner, which frankly I think is a bit of a kick in the teeth, to be honest, because at the end of the day, you trust those guys to carry on carrying their SA-80 and all the other ordnance that they have to carry during war, after they've seen some horrible stuff, to suggest when they come back home after they've made the sacrifices that they've made, that they can't be trusted to own a firearm when they've gone through all the checks is frankly disgusting. So it was good to see that this guy was allowed to, you know, he got his license and he was enjoying it and doing some shooting. And to be fair, he must have a few quid, because those things are very, very expensive. I mean, I think with the Accuracy International, I mean, what, they start at like £5,000, something like that. But yeah, it was a pleasure to shoot. But I must admit, as I said, I wouldn't want to take one deer stalking. I wouldn't want to try and trek sort of miles and miles with one, because yeah, it weighed an absolute ton. The scope on it was incredible as well. I don't know how much you spent on that, but the magnification went out to about 40 times. I think to shoot at 300 yards, I'd got it on 20 times zoom, which was plenty. I mean, it was really bringing the target really close as far as the scope was concerned. But, you know, 40 times, you know, that makes it so you can be pretty damn accurate out to really long distances. So, you know, sporting shooting, I could get into that, if I'm honest. I'm not normally into target shooting at all. You know, as you guys know, I'm a hunter, you know, I just happen to use guns, basically. But, you know, shooting steel, ringing steel at long distance is great fun. It really is great fun.
That was amazing.
So here we are on the rimfire range. Now, Tom brought his trusty Smith & Wesson M&P 1522 and sort of blazed away a little bit, to be honest. Now, he did get into a bit of trouble for rapid fire, which at the time I thought, you know, because it's normally, yeah, it's quite casual there at Catton Park. So I was thinking, oh, that's surprising that they would do that, because you get that at Bisley and places like that where people will complain about shooting rapid. But what I think it actually is, it's nothing to do, you know, they don't care. It's just that noise pollution and so on, where they're worried that people will complain, because you'll see later on we did some slug shooting, but we kind of had to get permission off the guy who runs it to be able to shoot slugs. And apparently the reason they're funny about shooting slugs is apparently people tend to be more shoot more quickly when they're shooting slugs, which I guess would make sense, because, you know, if you've got a mag-fed semi-automatic or something, then yeah, I suppose you can make a fair bit of noise. That said, this, as far as I'm aware, this is actually the last time Catton Park will be at this particular location. They're going to be moving down the road soon. So you could argue in many ways, it's like, why do they care? It doesn't matter. You know, they've got to move anyway. But, you know, obviously, if you get asked to do something, you do as they say. Now, here we are with Tom's, I think it's 1907, Lee Enfield SMLE. And again, you can see we're shooting at the Munkjack. So that's 300 yards. And I didn't put the footage of me shooting on there because it'd make this video too long and it'd get a bit, you know, repetitive, shall we say. But I was connecting quite a bit. And Tom was too, a lot more than the last time. It's a funny one, though, with iron sights. And I guess somebody more experienced with iron sights would probably be able to give me some insight on this. So anybody in the comments, by all means, do so. But when I'm shooting with iron sights, it seems to be a bit of a knack to know really where to hold it. Because in principle, you know, you've got the notch, you've got the post. So you'll stick the post in the notch. So you want the top of the post to be at the top of the flat of the notch, and that to be your crosshair, as it were, and you put it onto target. But whatever rifle you use or pistol you use, it seems to be different with each one. And if you look at it with the Enfield, you know, you've got the slider to choose the different ranges. And depending how you shoot can mean where you put the slide can be different between different people, I suppose. So it's a real knack, I suppose. I suppose what it comes down to is you've got to decide how you're going to shoot it. Keep doing that and adjust as necessary. But at that range, you know, if you're just trying to give it a holdover, it's ridiculous, because you'll get to the point where you really cannot see what you're shooting at. I mean, you're aiming, you know, quite a bit above where the Munkjack actually is, so to the extent where you can't see the Munkjack at all. And even when you can see it, they're not. If you do have it just in the notch of the sort of crosshair, as it were, of the iron sights, it's the post of the iron sights itself pretty much blanks out the target entirely. So it does really make you think. When you think, you know, 300 yards, you know, back in the day, I suppose they did engage usually closer than 300 yards, but it would be quite common to be shooting out with iron sights at really long distance ranges. And it makes you wonder, to be fair, how they ever hit anything, you know, and how it took so long for optical sights to become a thing. Because, you know, if you're using, you know, even just a red dot, even if it's got like virtually no magnification, just by virtue of being a crosshair, means that, you know, as long as it's, you know, not too thick, you know, you can actually see what you're shooting at. And if you need to give it some holdover, you can still see it. But with iron sights, the minute you start giving it a holdover, I mean, you've got the whole barrel of the gun in the way. So it's surprising, you know, because it's a relatively new thing, you know, using any kind of optics on a rifle. So yeah, it does make you wonder how those guys managed back in the day. But either way, as I said, as you can see, you know, Tom was shooting pretty well, and I was shooting pretty well, and yeah, it wasn't too bad. So here we are with Tom's latest project. Now this is basically an over and under skeet gun that Tom bought from the British Shooting Show. Last year, or was it the year? I think it was last year. And he'd actually seen it a couple of years running. The same guy at the same stall was trying to flog it and couldn't get anything, you know, couldn't get rid of it, basically. And it's interesting because, well, for lots of reasons, really, it's hard to describe, but you would have to see it close up to understand what I mean. But the way the action works, it's quite unusual. The way it all locks in when you close it. And it's also got vented barrels, you know, a bit like a muzzle brake on both barrels on the sides. So Tom saw it and eventually managed to get it for about £180, which is really pretty cheap. And he thought, yeah, this will make a perfect slug gun, because with a skeet choke, that's virtually cylinder bore. And as I said, you've got what amounts to really a muzzle brake on either side of the gun. And, that makes it pretty good for shooting slugs. The only sort of delay he's had on setting it up is he obviously had to get a rail fitted, and the rail he's got is essentially attaches to the rib, and then it kind of overhangs the top of the gun where the scope is, and you can see as I'm closing it, there's a bit of vibration, and the scope almost sort of moves a little bit. I mean, theoretically, it's still returning to the same place, so it should work. But that scope is actually off an air rifle, and it did seem to kind of slightly break a bit with usage, so be aware of that. You need something a bit more powerful. Now here I am with a very beefy 45-70 lever action, and you can see I've just got smacked right on the nose by the scope. Now, before I even had a shot with this, I was being cautious because you can see me holding my head back here, because the eye relief isn't right for me anyway, so I'd have needed to move my head back anyway. But obviously I'm very aware with the recoil that it's going to come back a lot, and as you can see with every shot it's really close in the way it comes back. So if it was me, I could do with more length of pull to get behind it properly, and possibly just moving the scope a little bit forward. But that's the thing with any rifle, it's about it fitting you. But yeah, it did a bit of a number on me, to be honest. It's a lot of horsepower with the 45-70. Here's Tom having a go. Now, he was sort of sensible enough to wear glasses. But you can see, even with Tom, he's even though he's trying to lean into it, which is the guy was saying lean into it, because obviously it does kick. You are very aware that it's going to come back on you. And it's, it is a gun I would really like, to be honest. I would really like one of those for shooting deer, and, I suppose you could shoot boar with them as well, given the opportunity. It'd be a lot of fun, really handy little rifle with a lot of power. You can see this in slow motion and be getting smacked. You see that really knocked me, that did. But, as I said, it's a great rifle. I really, really want one.